in freezing cold Branford, Connecticut, and we are here to see this Pacific Seacraft 40. God, I can barely talk. My lips are so cold. They're like slow to move. Oh, okay, you can do this. The boat is totally covered up, so we're not gonna be able to film this in the same fashion that we've filmed a lot of the other boats that we've done, just because we won't be able to get a very good look at the deck. The interior is really dark, but try not to let that affect your opinion of the boat, because the fact of the matter is that this is the last boat on our list. So the question is really going to be, do we like it as much as the Valiant 42? Do we like it not as much, but we like it enough so that we're willing to compromise? There's a lot at stake here. I'm really curious what's gonna happen, so let's jump in there and see what we think.
Before jumping in, let's hear some advice from professional sailor and author John Kretschmer.
Today we're going to talk about the Pacific Seacraft 40. It's one of my favorite boats, I confess. It's classic Krelock. In fact, it was the last boat that Bill Krelock designed for Pacific Seacraft. And, you know, at that point, he had really kind of nailed his formula. It's a handsome boat, it's a double-ender, fairly narrow. It's a little more sophisticated than some of his earlier boats. It's got a little bit of a broader section in the bilges. It can carry more capacity. It can shoulder its way through a pretty big sea. It's a super capable offshore boat. So what makes an offshore boat in my mind? A boat that looks after the crew, and a boat that can handle more than the crew can. That's classic Krelock philosophy, no doubt about it. And the 40 that's the boat. Secondly, a boat has to track. We've talked about this throughout the reviews, but the 40, like the Valiant 42 and most of the boats we've looked at, this boat will lay down a track. It won't sail close to the wind, but what it does sail, it will give it to you. You're not giving it up in leeway. And thirdly, it's important that a boat has a balanced rig and adapts well to self-steering. Offshore, your vane or your autopilot, they're really the most critical crew member aboard, and if the boat can't self-steer itself or is always working and laboring, that's not a great offshore boat. So specifically, the 40 has a great deck. It has a nice bulwark as you make your way forward. There are handholds everywhere. It's kind of that cutter rig that I like, with a short bowsprit, great anchoring platform. The cockpit's small. I mean, that's the double-ender situation. You kind of, you like the aesthetic, you like the sea-keeping ability, but you give up space. When you go below, you sort of see the epitome of an ocean-going boat. It's got a great galley. You can cook on either tack. Handholds again everywhere, hip holes. As you make your way around the boat, you realize this thing is designed for being at sea, not at the dock, and that's a big criteria for Desiree and Jordan. The construction becomes obvious below as you're looking at the boat. It's got a full liner, kind of a molded piece that stiffens the hull and becomes the base for most of the furniture. And as you know, I'm not a huge fan of that, but Pacific Seacraft did it better than anybody, and there's no structural question about the boat. There are some limitations of liners though. They do prevent you from accessing the hull, but they also give you a super clean, tidy look. They're easy to wash up, but it falls clearly into the parameter of being a boat that is more at home at sea than at the dock. It's one of my favorites.
Even though this boat was winterized, I could still tell just how gorgeous it would be in the water and under sail. The varnished wood trim accented the boat nicely and really made it look as pretty as it is strong. It was hard not to notice the beefy, high bulwarks and the super grippy non-skid, which really made me feel like the boat would protect us in rough weather. Finally, I was surprised by how small the cockpit appeared, but I did like how deep and protected it felt. The interior of this boat looked like it came straight out of a magazine. Everything was gorgeously maintained and it felt open, spacious, and surprisingly modern. I also noticed the fiberglass liner immediately, which made me think how easy it would be to keep everything clean. The main salon with its wraparound settee was super inviting and made me want to kick off my shoes and settle in.
As
far as the galley, I think the Pacific Seacraft 40 is very comparable to the Valiant 42's galley. The counter space here is maybe a little bit better than the Valiant 42. I've got this little area here that I could really wedge myself against if the boat's heeled over and do a lot of my food prep here. I also like how the sink is kind of like in the middle of the boat so that if we're heeled over, we won't get water coming up in the sink. And the fridge looks a little bit smaller than the Valiant 42, but opening this baby up, it goes way down. And I would say both the Valiant 42 and the Pacific Seacraft 40 can hold a lot of food in them. The last thing that's a little bit different is that this boat has a little bit less available storage in the galley for like food that I could reach to quickly or pots and pans. That being said, there is a lot of storage on this boat, so I could store food anywhere else, and a lot of it I would just have to kind of leave the galley to get it. There are some Pacific Seacraft 40s that you can get like a cabinet installed right here, and that would probably solve that problem. So it's not something we couldn't work around.
And I gotta say, as nav stations go, this is the mother of all the nav stations that we've seen, I think. It's got the most space, it's the most comfortable. On the Valiant, the hull curves right below my feet, so I kind of have to scrunch my feet off to one side. Whereas this, the floor where my feet are, is totally flat and it's nice and wide. And just as a reminder, we're looking at nav stations not because we're going to be looking at paper charts, but what we really want is an office. And we can't have a separate room like you would in a house, so at the very least it'd be nice if we had a separate space that's just for computer work. We spend a lot of our lives editing, like a lot of our actual time. And so having a space where we could do that comfortably, that would be really nice. And as for the Godzilla headroom, the boat does really well. I mean, I've got more than enough headroom here in the center line of the boat. And then here in the galley, got good headroom all the way throughout. Almost everything about this boat is me-sized, which I really appreciate.
So this quarter berth is super cozy. The room itself is really a nice size. As far as the bed though, I would say that the bed on the Valiant 42 is a lot bigger than the bed in this quarter berth. So this bed is smaller because it tapers a lot with the shape of the hull, which is a little bit unfortunate if we wanted to have our parents come and stay with us. You could definitely fit 2 adults in here, but it would kind of be a squeeze. One thing that I do like about this quarter berth more than the Valiant 42 is we've got these 2 portholes right here which lead into the cockpit, which would be really nice if Jordan and I were trying to communicate with each other while one of us is on watch and the other one's down below resting. As for the head, it is really nice and spacious in here. I would say between this head and the head on the Valiant 42, this one is a little bit more spacious and a little nicer. One pretty cool feature about this head is it's got this really neat kind of like wet locker behind the toilet. It's all lined with fiberglass. There's no wood in there that you'd worry about getting wet. There's a drain at the bottom. There's a place that you can hang things from. If we were underway on a passage and it were rainy and you wanted to come down below, take off your wet clothes and not get the rest of the boat all nasty, you could take them off, put them in here, take a nice cozy hot shower, dry off, and then get back into the boat without getting anything salty or wet. On Atticus, we didn't have that, so when we were underway, we would be like damp and sticky, and everything on Atticus would be damp and sticky and salty. So this would be really, really cool.
And as for the shower stall, I think this is the biggest shower stall that we've seen on any of the boats that we've looked at. It's big, like, you know, width-wise. It's got a really big area for me to sit in, but most importantly to me, it's got headroom. And a lot of the boats that we've been on, the shower stalls have headroom only because I could fit my head in the hatch that they have. Whereas with this one, it has a nice hatch here, but I fit under it.
As far as the main salon on this boat, I think it's probably the nicest we've seen so far. It has so much room, super, super cozy, really conducive to social interaction. Also, another cool feature of this area is that this table drops down to make this whole area one huge bed.
Yeah, so, I mean, this area would be like a killer kids' playpen. And we could definitely set up like netting or something here on the side. So it could just be a safe place where we could just throw the kids and know that they'd be okay. Also, this would be a good area for guests to sleep.
Or even just like movie night, you know?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, we could all get cozy here and watch a movie on the TV. The Valiant 42, like the interior is very workable. Like it would be a good platform for sailing around the world. But this would definitely be a more pleasant living space to raise kids on for sure. One major difference between the Pacific Seacraft 40 and the Valiant 42 is that the Valiant 42 puts the water tanks under the settees. The tanks on this boat, some of the tanks, are located in the bilge area. They are totally removable. This section right here can literally come detached with a screwdriver, and then you can move it and then pull the tanks that are beneath the floorboards right here. By not putting the tanks in the settees, it opens up a tremendous amount of storage space that the Valiant 42 doesn't have. I mean, everything below this settee, everything below that U settee over there, that's all storage.
And it is gigantic. I could fit so many canned goods under here. It's ridiculous. In fact, I could probably fit in there. This is really, really enticing as far as provisioning and being off-grid for a long time.
The one downside is there's no drawers to get into the storage under the settees, so you do have to take the cushions up and then access it from the top. This method makes it so that you have the most amount of storage, you utilize all the available space, but it's just more of a pain to access it, so a little bit of a bummer.
As far as the V-berth, I love this V-berth. It has a really, really cozy kind of room-like feel.
My biggest complaint with most V-berths is the V factor, right? Because you have way more room than you need up at the head, and then you have less room than you want down at the feet. And so what they've done is, I think they've kind of pushed the berth a little bit aft so that you can have more of a wide section at your feet, and then they've made this head area narrower so it's easier to get in and out of the bed, and yet you don't really lose any effective like sleeping area.
One downside to this V-berth though is I feel like on the Valiant 42, the Queen V-berth configuration, all of this area was storage space, and I really, really liked that. This room has a lot more of an open feel, but it also has a lot less storage space because of it.
The really neat thing about the Valiant is it has a forward hatch on the foredeck, so like above your body or your feet. And that would be amazing because when it's really, really hot and you have a hatch that's kind of like aft of your head, that airflow is going to go from the hatch through the rest of the boat, but like your legs and your feet are going to be really hot. It's hard for me to like even imagine feeling hot right now. But also just in general, the Valiant has more hatches. The hatches are in general a little bit larger, but I will say the Pacific Seacraft has a sufficient amount of ventilation. I mean, these boats are pretty like neck and neck. So you can see here the engine access at the companionway is okay. It's not great though. Problem being that there's no side access to the engine. Also, you can see the engine and its components come up really close to the side wall of the engine compartment. And so if I had to, say, remove the starter motor, which is like way up under here, that would really suck. Like I'd have to kind of get my arm in there and find nuts and bolts blind just by feeling around. And you can get into the engine compartment on the aft end from the panel in the cockpit that's removable. Like on the surface, this is really great access, but in reality, like I don't really know how I'm supposed to work on stuff down here. Where do I sit? Where do I put my feet? Like watch, I don't even know. I mean, I kind of fit in here, but I can't actually do anything, you know? One thing I might be missing is you can remove this piece of wood and then get to the steerage. And maybe if you removed that, then I could comfortably sit back there. That's definitely a possibility. So I don't want to judge it till I've like experienced it fully. One thing going for the Pacific Seacraft though, is that this right here is a 54 horsepower Yanmar, whereas the Valiant 42 has a 44 horsepower Westerbeek. I really have heard from a lot of people that that 44 horsepower engine just is a little bit small for the Valiant. On top of that, I've even heard that because the engine's so underpowered that a lot of times you can have problems with the engine, like the head can blow. Going with the Valiant, I feel like that would be a huge headache, having an engine that's too small and hard to get parts for.
There are so many aspects of this boat that I loved, like the large, family-friendly living space, the luxurious head, and the perfect nav station. But the engine access was a little awkward, the quarter berth was on the small side, and even though the boat had a lot of deep storage, it's a little inconvenient to access, and the storage for everyday living was a bit limited. All that said, it would still be an absolute dream to live on this boat, so I'm going to give it 4 out of 5 stars for livability.
As for the cockpit here at the helm station, I think it's a great helm station. I mean, I have everything that I need to single hand the boat. I can easily reach the winches, the primary winches. I've got good visibility all around. Also, the boat has a fairly brand new B&G autopilot, electronic autopilot. I've got nice new B&G instruments in front of me and then a big Garmin chart plotter. Even this seat here is raised so that I can kind of get a good look over the deck. I get elevated. If we're sailing, you know, and the boat heels over, I could be sitting on the edge of this curved seat and it would be like a flat seat for me. It's got a wider cockpit right around the wheel so that I can walk around the wheel to the helm station. On the Valiant, the wheel basically made it right to the edge of the cockpit seating, so I'd have to stand up on the seating. Then we've got a lot of the lines led aft into the cockpit, and it's cool. There's 2 winches here on the starboard side and 2 on the port, and then a lot of line clutches, so it's obvious that you can do all of your major controls from back here at the cockpit, nice and protected under the Dodger. You could definitely seat like 5 people here comfortably. Alright, so back here by the mast, you can see the boat's got granny bars, which I really appreciate. That makes reefing up here at the mast a lot safer. But they also have these giant cowl vents with relatively big dorade boxes. This big cowl vent is going to let a lot of air into the boat, whether you're offshore and there's tons of spray or if it's raining or whatever. And typically when you have big cowl vents like this, you need to have like a metal cage around it to keep lines from getting hung up on the vents, but they just placed them right underneath the granny bars. So to me, I think every offshore boat should have exactly this setup. Another thing I like is that the non-skid is molded into the gel coat, so it's stood up really well and we wouldn't have to touch that up for a long time. And to me, non-skid is a huge safety issue, the fact that you're not going to be slipping around while you're offshore, because ultimately falling off the boat is your primary concern. Most of the through deck fittings are bolted onto raised portions of the deck, and it makes it so that no water can kind of pool around the deck fitting itself, because that's ultimately how you get leaking into the boat. So that's going to save the coring. You're not going to have as many core issues and just the kind of damage that water can wreak if you get it leaking into the boat. And they did the same thing with the chain plates, which is just so freaking smart. I love it. Like, the vast majority of the problems that I've experienced on boats come from leaking chain plates. And so here we've got the raised portion of the deck and then this really substantial plate that's welded to the chain plate, and that's going to really make for a large surface area that can be sealed with marine sealants. The other thing I love is the upper chain plate for the upper shrouds is outboard, so it doesn't pass through the deck. I think the chain plate arrangement on this boat is perfect. Absolutely perfect. So the Pacific Seacraft has a really substantial bulwark here. If you slip and fall on the side deck, the fact that your foot has something good to grab is great. The other really nice thing about it though is that you can mount stanchions to the vertical part of the bulwark. And that's really nice because that means that these stanchions are gonna be really strong. And if you were to fall, say 3 or 4 feet while sailing and heeling over and hit that stanchion, I mean, it needs to be really rock solid. Also, these stanchions are super high. I think they're a little over 30-inch tall stanchions. So again, that's a really good safety feature because this lifeline is going to hit you above your knee rather than at it. So there's a decent chance that if your leg just hits this, you'll be able to stay on the boat. The boat does have these really nice midship cleats. Too many boats don't have good midship cleats, and a lot of the time they will be on the side deck, and that's just like a tow killer. So having this cleat up on the cap rail is really nice. You will see the cap rail is this beautiful wood with a really nice varnished finish, and these hand rails here are wood. There's a decent amount of wood on the Pacific Seacraft 40. There's not too much wood that's structural on the boat. It's all just for looks for the most part, but it would be a decent amount of work to maintain, which is less than ideal. So I gotta say the Valiant wins on that one. So one thing that the Pacific Seacraft does really well that the Valiant also does is it's got a super freaking beefy stainless steel bowsprit. And this one has the bow pulpit tie into it really well. So you've got these fittings that are welded to that bowsprit, and this bow pulpit extends quite a ways aft, so you're nice and protected when you come up to the bow, and it's really sturdy. It ties into fittings at the bulwark, so again, another really nice feature. And I also really like how the windlass is on this raised platform, and it's quite a bit above the foredeck, so that if water gets up onto the foredeck, it doesn't go down into the hawse pipe into the chain locker. So that is also really neat. I am so freaking impressed by the amount of thought put into every little detail of this boat. And as a result, it just screams seaworthiness. It's a bummer how small the cockpit is, but for safety offshore, small cockpits are a good thing. Also, all the wood on deck would be a lot of work to maintain, but there's no denying that it adds a huge amount of beauty to the boat. So I'm gonna give this boat 5 out of 5 for sailability. So first off, the Pacific Seacraft 40 and the Valiant 42 are very similar boats, but there are a few ways in which they are different. First of all, the PS40 has a shorter waterline length and longer overhangs. It doesn't really carry its beam as far aft as the Valiant does. Therefore, it needs more of an overhang aft in order to give it enough reserve buoyancy to avoid getting pooped or for waves to come up over into the cockpit. This results in lower top speed, a smaller cockpit, and less interior space aft. That said, the PS40 does have a slightly better comfort ratio due to its longer overhangs. Now I gotta say, the comfort ratio is a pretty rough way to decide which boat would be more comfortable offshore, but it is something. The PS40 also has a more rounded hull shape amidships, which allows for that larger salon that the boat has, as well as a bit more stability. Also, the PS40 has a well-protected prop, which is a really great feature. The Valiant 42's prop is totally exposed and could lead to major problems if a line were to get wrapped up into the prop. Another benefit of such a large skeg, as well as the deep V section of the hull between the skeg and the keel, is going to be the fact that the boat has a lot more lateral stability in the after part of the boat than the Valiant 42 has. From what I've read, Bill Krelock designed the boat this way to help the boat avoid broaching in large following seas. I don't know for a fact that it works, but it sounds like a good idea to me. The one downside to this approach is that it's going to present a lot more wetted surface area, meaning that the boat might not sail as well in light winds as the Valiant 42. So as far as I can tell, the PS40 compromises a little bit of speed and gains a little bit of comfort in return. But the differences between these boats are slight. The PS40 checks all the boxes for me, so I'm giving it 5 stars for design.
Now let's hear from our broker, Bernie Jackets.
I don't care how good of a sailor you are or bad of a sailor, but if you're really a bad sailor, a good boat will take care of you. Bob Perry always said to me that, Bernie, you pick a good boat and you'll break way before the boat will. That's what we want. We want definitely a boat that will outlive you. I have to say that Pacific Seacraft are just really well done, really well built. They're gorgeous, the glasswork, the woodwork. It's a great design boat that will take a couple to any corner of the world. Basically, I call it lion and lamb's clothing, meaning that basically above the waterline, it looks really traditional. A lot of people say, oh, you know, like look at that old futzy boat. But when the push comes to shove and you're in a good 10-foot sea and, you know, you got gusts up to 34 and you got a staysail up and a double reef main and you know, you're going to be just like laughing the entire way. I think that head-to-head, if you're going to put a Pacific Seacraft with a Valiant 42, they're going to go head-to-head the entire way. Stay tuned, man, because it's really exciting. It's like, you know, who's going to win Jeopardy this week? Anyway, I think it's a great boat. You can get it between 175, 180. They hold their value really well, up into like the mid to high 200s. I can't wait to continue watching Bud and Buddy, Desiree and Jordan, as they raise their family anchored in some beautiful lagoon somewhere way, way over the horizon that all of us keep continuing to dream about going to.
So this was an incredible boat, and it definitely checks all of our boxes. It would be big enough for a family of 4 over the next 10 years.
It also checks the box of sailing more and working on the boat less. The owner is the very first owner, so he bought it brand new. Every year he hauls it out for the winter and covers it so the boat hasn't been exposed to the elements for roughly half of its life. It's also been very lightly used, so the owner just used it recreationally from time to time. And he's also spent a lot of money keeping it professionally maintained. So it is a 23-year-old boat, but in a lot of ways, it's effectively a much younger boat for the price of an older boat. So that's very intriguing to us.
And finally, it checks our third box, which is prioritizing comfort offshore versus comfort at anchor. This boat was clearly made to be offshore and to keep its crew safe and comfortable.
Now, you may remember last week that we made a lowball offer on a Valiant 42 that's for sale out in Seattle. It's asking $260, and it's just a little bit above our price range. So we wanted to see if they would come down significantly in price. Well, we found out just the other day that they rejected our offer, and it looks like we're going to have to pay quite a bit more if we hope to buy that boat. Now, whereas the V42 in Seattle is asking $260, the Pacific Seacraft in Connecticut is asking $230. So there's a $30,000 difference between the two boats. But on top of that, the boat in Connecticut, were we to buy it, we could register the boat in Rhode Island and we wouldn't have to pay any sales tax on the boat. Whereas the Valiant in Seattle, we would have to pay something like a 6.5% tax. So that would expand that price difference to something more like $50,000. So then the question really becomes, do we want to spend roughly $50,000 more in order to buy the Valiant 42 out in Seattle? Or do we feel like the Pacific Seacraft represents really good value for what they're asking?
So be sure to check out next week's episode where we'll dive into the pros and cons of each of these boats, and we're also going to be reaching out to some of our sailing mentors to ask them what they think. We're going to be talking to SV Delos and Rand Sailing to get some advice about raising kids on boats. We're also going to be talking to John Kretschmer, Lynn Party, Nigel Calder, and of course everyone's favorite broker, Bernie Jackets. And we're also going to be opening up a poll to you to see what you think we should do for this huge decision that we have coming up. So we hope to see you guys next week.